The annual 4th of July picnic at Riverside Methodist Church was a tradition in the small town of Oak Ridge. Families gathered on the expansive church grounds that sloped gently down to the Willow River, sharing potluck dishes and playing games while waiting for the evening fireworks. The summer of 2017 was particularly beautiful, clear skies, moderate temperatures, and enough of a breeze to keep the mosquitoes at bay. The Miller family had arrived early that morning. Pastor David Miller helped set up the grills while his wife, Rebecca, organized the dessert table. Their children, 12-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Tyler, had immediately raced off to join their friends from Sunday school. Check in every hour, Rebecca had called after them, receiving distracted waves in response. It was a safe environment, church grounds filled with people they'd known all their lives. In a town where serious crime was almost non-existent, by mid-afternoon, the picnic was in full swing. Parents chatted in lawn chairs while keeping casual, eyes on the various groups of children playing tag, tossing frisbees, or wading in the shallow section of the river cordoned off for swimming. Rebecca glanced at her watch, realizing she hadn't seen Emma or Tyler for nearly 2 hours. "Have you seen the kids?" she asked her husband as he flipped burgers on the grill. Pastor David pointed vaguely toward the riverbank. "I think they were." With the Thompsons boys near the water, Rebecca made her way down to the designated swimming area, but didn't see her children among the splashing kids. She asked a few parents, then some of the children, but no one had seen Emma or Tyler recently. What began as mild concern quickly escalated as she circled back to David. "I can't find them anywhere," she said, her voice tightening. Within 30 minutes, the entire picnic had transformed into a search party. Church members spread out across the grounds, calling for the Miller children. As dusk approached with no sign of Emma or Tyler, Pastor David made the call to the local police. Officer Grant Wilson arrived first, quickly followed by 3 other officers from Oak Ridge's small police force. They organized the searchers into groups, systematically covering the church property and the surrounding woods. "When was the last confirmed sighting?" Officer Wilson asked the distraught parents. "Around 1 o'clock, Mrs. Thompson answered. Before the Millers could respond, they were playing hide-and-seek with my boys and some other children. But then, Jamie said they went off on their own, saying they had a secret adventure planned." The word adventure sent a chill through Rebecca. Emma had been reading adventure novels lately, full of children exploring caves and finding hidden treasures. "The old boat launch," she gasped, gripping her husband's arm. "She's been talking about exploring it ever since the Hendersons mentioned fishing there. The abandoned boat launch was a half-mile downstream, officially closed for years due to unstable banks and strong currents."
Alice.
As flashlights pierced the gathering darkness, the search shifted to the riverbank. By midnight, with no sign of the children, the state police had been called in. By morning, dive teams were searching the murky waters of the Willow River. They found nothing, no clothing, no footprints, no sign that Emma and Tyler Miller had ever been there at all. The days following the disappearance blurred together for the Millers. Their home became command central for the search operation. With maps spread across the dining table and volunteers signing in and out, the church community rallied around them, providing meals, offering shoulders to cry on, and joining the daily search parties that combed increasingly wider areas around the river. News vans from the nearest city arrived, broadcasting the children's school photos across the state. Flyers with their faces appeared on storefront windows, community bulletin boards, and gas station counters throughout the county. Emma with her long brown braids and braces, Tyler with his cowlick and missing front tooth. The initial theory that the children had been swept away by the river lost credibility as the thorough water search yielded nothing. Attention turned to the possibility of abduction, though no one could imagine who would target the pastor's children from a crowded church event. "We're looking at everyone who was at that picnic," Detective Sarah Morales told the Millers on day 5, her voice gentle but firm. "And everyone who might have been in the area but wasn't officially part of the church gathering."
David Miller
nodded numbly, his clerical collar seeming too tight around his neck. He hadn't delivered a sermon since the disappearance. With guest pastors filling in while the congregation prayed for a miracle, Rebecca had stopped sleeping almost entirely, spending nights staring at her children's empty beds or pacing the riverbank with a flashlight, convinced she'd missed something. As weeks passed without leads, the police presence dwindled. The news vans departed for fresher tragedies. The case remained open, but active investigation gradually gave way to occasional follow-ups on diminishing tips. On the one-year anniversary, the church held a prayer vigil. Hundreds attended. Holding candles and sharing memories of Emma and Tyler, Rebecca and David stood together at the front, hollow-eyed but standing, somehow still standing. "We haven't given up hope," David told the gathered crowd, his voice cracking. "Wherever they are, whatever happened, we believe they're in God's hands." Some in the congregation exchanged glances at this. Faith was being tested in Oak Ridge. Not just for the Millers, but for many who couldn't reconcile their belief in a loving God with the disappearance of two innocent children. By the second anniversary, the Millers had established a foundation in their children's names, providing support for families of missing children and funding for search and rescue training. They had channeled their grief into action, though the question mark hanging over their lives remained. The third anniversary passed, then the fourth. Life in Oak Ridge settled into a new normal, with the Miller case becoming part of local history. Tragedy referred to in hushed tones, a cautionary tale told to remind children not to wander off. But for David and Rebecca, time had become measured differently before and after. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone their children should have reached was marked quietly, painfully. Emma would be in college now. Tyler would be learning to drive. By year 5, Rebecca had returned to teaching at the elementary school. David continued leading the congregation, his sermons often touching on themes of endurance and faith in darkness. They had weathered the storm of their loss without breaking, though. The cost was etched in the premature lines on their faces and the silver threading through Rebecca's once dark hair. They had learned to live with the not knowing until the day the knowing began. Frank Burnett had been fishing the Willow River for over 40 years. He knew every bend, every deep pool, every snag that might cost him an expensive lure. On a crisp October morning in 2025, he was working his way along a stretch of riverbank that had been altered by the previous spring's flooding. The high waters had carved away part of the bank about 2. If this heartbreaking mystery has you gripped, take a moment right now to hit the like button and subscribe to Gone Cold. Your support helps us uncover more real stories that prove some answers are hidden for years, waiting to be found. By nightfall, the state police had recovered 2 sets of human remains, one larger, one smaller, both partially decomposed, but preserved enough by the clay soil to confirm they were a juvenile. Chief Wilson made the hardest drive of his career. To the Millers' home on the outskirts of town, the porch light was on, as it had been every night for 8 years, a beacon for children who never returned. When Rebecca opened the door to find Chief Wilson standing there, his hat in his hands, and to state police officers behind him, she didn't ask questions. She simply turned to call for David. Her hand braced against the doorframe, as if already preparing for the weight of what was to come. Inside, seated at the kitchen table where search maps had once been spread, Wilson delivered the news they had both dreaded and needed. "We found what we believe are Emma and Tyler's remains," he said, his professional demeanor cracking slightly. "About 2 miles downstream from the old boat launch, buried in the riverbank. The recent flood exposed the site." David's hand found Rebecca's across the table, gripping it tightly. "Were they? ... Couldn't finish the question. "We won't know details until the medical examiner completes the examination," Wilson said carefully. "But we did recover items that suggest it was not an accidental drowning." Rebecca closed her eyes, tears streaming silently down her face. "The backpack," she whispered. "Emma's blue backpack?" Wilson nodded, surprised. "Did you know?" "A mother knows," she said simply. "I've seen it in my dreams for 8 years." As the initial shock gave way to a torrent of questions, one stood out above all others. If the children had been buried deliberately on the riverbank, hidden all these years until nature revealed their resting place, then someone in their tight-knit community had been harboring a terrible secret. And with the discovery of the grave, that secret was about to unravel. The discovery of Emma and Tyler Miller's remains transformed the sleepy town of Oak Ridge overnight. state police vehicles lined the riverbank, their lights reflecting off the water as forensic teams worked methodically to process the scene. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting aerial footage of the recovery operation to a nation that had long since moved on. From the story of the missing pastor's children, at the county medical examiner's office, Dr. Lydia Chen supervised the painstaking examination of the remains. 8 years of exposure to soil and occasional water had degraded much of the evidence. But some truths could still be extracted from bone and artifact. The male child has a fracture to the occipital bone, she noted into her recorder, examining Tyler's skull. Consistent with blunt force trauma, not post-mortem, there are signs of healing initiation, suggesting he survived for a short period. After the injury, Emma's remains told a different story. No signs of trauma to the skeleton, but the position of the body suggested her hands had been bound. Remnants of synthetic cord were still present around the wrist bones. Chief Wilson and Detective Sarah Morales would return from the state police to lead the investigation, received Dr. Chin's preliminary report with grim expressions. So Tyler was struck in the head, but it wasn't immediately fatal, Wilson summarized. And Emma was restrained, with no obvious cause of death yet determined. Without more soft tissue, we may never know exactly how she died, Dr. Chen acknowledged. But the evidence suggests these children were victims of homicide, not an accidental drowning. The contents of Emma's backpack provided the first tangible leads. Though water and time had destroyed much of what it once contained, a few items had survived: a plastic hair clip, a church youth group membership card, and most significantly, a disposable camera. Its film somehow intact within its waterproof casing. We'll need to process this carefully, Morales said, handling the camera with gloved hands. If there are recoverable images, they might be the last thing these children saw, even who they saw. Meanwhile, the investigation turned to reviewing the original case files, interviewing again everyone who had attended the church picnic 8 years earlier. People who had been children then were now adults. Some who had given statements were now deceased. The community that had once been united in searching for the Miller children now eyed one another with suspicion. At Riverside Methodist, attendance at Sunday service swelled as curious townsfolk and media gathered to witness Pastor Miller's first sermon since the discovery. Standing at the pulpit, David Miller looked both broken and resolute. For 8 years we prayed for answers, he began, his voice steady, despite the emotion visible on his face. Now, God has seen fit to provide them, though not in the way we hoped. My family asks for your continued prayers as we seek justice for Emma and Tyler. The third row, Rebecca Miller sat with her sister who had flown in from Oregon. Her gaze remained fixed on her husband, drawing strength from his words even as she noticed something she hadn't seen before, how certain members of the congregation wouldn't meet her eyes, how some shifted uncomfortably in their seats when David mentioned justice. After the service, as church members offered condolences, Rebecca found herself watching their expressions with new intensity. Who among these familiar faces might have known something all along? Who might have been involved? The questions felt blasphemous in the church hallway, yet she couldn't silence them. As Rebecca and David drove home, passing the infamous Riverbank where news vans were still parked, she broke their silence. Someone from the church did this, she said, voicing the thought that had been growing since the discovery. Someone. We know. David's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but he didn't contradict her. The same suspicion had been haunting him, too terrible to acknowledge until now. 3 days after the discovery, Forensic Lab managed to develop the film from the disposable camera found in Emma's backpack. Most of the images were mundane shots from the church picnic, children playing games, adults manning the grills. Emma had apparently been documenting the day, capturing ordinary moments that now felt precious and tragic. The final 3 photographs told a different story. In one, Tyler was pictured from a distance, talking to someone only partially visible. At the edge of the frame, an adult male wearing what appeared to be the navy blue shirt that had been the unofficial uniform for church volunteers that day. The second showed the old boat launch from the walking path that led to it, suggesting the children had indeed gone there. It was the third image that caught Detective Morales' attention, a blurry, slightly tilted shot that appeared to have been taken in haste. It showed a small wooden shed near the boat launch, one that hadn't been mentioned in any of the original search reports. "Do we know about this structure?" she asked, showing the photo to Chief Wilson. Wilson frowned. "Not on any of our maps from the search. That area was covered thoroughly." "It's not thoroughly enough," Morales said grimly. "We need to find this shed." The location proved difficult to pinpoint. The landscape along the riverbank had changed considerably over 8 years, with flooding and natural growth altering familiar landmarks. After consulting with, as Morales and Wilson prepared to drive to Daniel's home, Rebecca Miller requested a meeting. "There's something I never told the police," she admitted, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, something Emma mentioned a few weeks before they disappeared. "I didn't think it was relevant then, but now." Emma said Mr. Daniels had shown them a special place by the river where they could see turtles. She said it was a secret that he'd asked them not to tell anyone else, because too many people would scare the turtles away. Innocent, just an adult being kind to children who loved nature. The revelation added urgency to the impending interview. As Morales and Wilson drove toward Mark Daniels' home, they received a call from Dr. Chen at the lab. "The DNA results from the knife are preliminary," she cautioned, "but we have enough for a familial match. The blood belongs to one of the Miller children." Mark Daniels' house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in Hartsville, a 20-minute drive from Oak Ridge. It was a modest ranch-style home with meticulously maintained flower beds and a silver sedan parked in the driveway. Nothing about its appearance suggested it might be connected to the deaths of 2 children. Detective Morales and Chief Wilson approached the front door, their unmarked police car parked a discreet distance away. They had decided on a casual approach, a follow-up interview, rather than a confrontation that might put Daniels on alert. The woman who answered the door introduced herself as Lisa Daniels, Mark's wife of 6 years. "Mark's not home right now," she explained, inviting them into a living room decorated with framed Bible verses and family photos. "He's at the church, preparing for Wednesday night service. He's the children's ministry director," she added with obvious pride. Morales noted the irony silently. "We just need to ask him a few follow-up questions about the Miller case," she explained, now that new evidence has been discovered. Lisa's expression darkened. Such a terrible thing. Mark was devastated when those children disappeared. He still mentions them in his prayers. She gestured to a shelf where, among family photos, stood a framed picture of what appeared to be a church youth group. "That's from the last summer camp before they went missing. Mark was one of the counselors." Wilson moved closer to examine the photo while Morales continued the conversation. In the image, Emma and Tyler stood among a group of children, with Mark Daniels behind them, his hands resting on Emma's shoulders. "How long have you and Mark been married?" Morales asked casually. 6 years in August," Lisa replied. "At a regional church conference. I was a widow, and Mark had never married. It was a blessing to find each other later in life." "And you moved here from Oak Ridge?" Lisa nodded. Mark needed a fresh start. The Miller tragedy affected him deeply here. Blamed himself for not watching the riverbank more carefully that day. As Wilson continued studying the photos, he noticed something addin several images. Mark Daniels wore a distinctive watch with a thick leather band. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't immediately place what. "Do you know when?" "Mark will be back?" Morales asked. "He usually returns around 6, Lisa said, checking her watch. "But I can call him if it's urgent." "It won't be necessary," Morales assured her. "We'll try to catch him at the church." As they left the house, Wilson turned to Morales. "That watch in the photos, I've seen it before. Back in the car." They reviewed the evidence photos from the recovered backpack. Among the items found was a partial leather strap, initially thought to be unimportant. Looking at it now, Wilson could see the similarity to the watch band Daniels wore in the photos. "We need to find him now," Morales decided, starting the car before he hears we're looking for him. At Hartsville Community Church, the secretary informed them that Mark Daniels had called in sick that morning and hadn't been to the church all day. "His wife just told us he was here," Wilson said, alarm growing. A call to the Daniels residence went unanswered. Within minutes, Morales had requested backup and a bolo. Be on the lookout for Mark Daniels and his silver sedan. When officers Arrived at the Daniels home, they found Lisa in a state of confusion. "He called me right after you left," she explained, visibly shaken. "Asked if anyone had been by the house. When I told him about you, he just hung up. He's not answering his phone now." As police combed through the Daniels home, they discovered a locked cabinet in the garage. With Lisa's permission, they broke it open to find a disturbing collection of news clippings about the Miller case. What appeared to be pages from Emma's diary, and most damning of all, a small box containing a child's bracelet with the name Tyler engraved on it, and a silver necklace with a ballet slipper charm that Rebecca Miller later identified as Emma's. By nightfall, every law enforcement agency in the state was searching for Mark Daniels. His face appeared on emergency broadcasts, and roadblocks were established on major highways. The question on everyone's mind was not just where he was fleeing to, but why, after 8 years of apparent normal life, he had maintained a shrine to the children whose deaths he had seemingly gotten away with. The answer began to emerge when Lisa Daniels, distraught and cooperating fully with police, shared a disturbing detail. Mark had recently become agitated about the church's plans to expand its property along the Riverbank, the same area where the children's remains had been discovered. He kept saying they shouldn't disturb that land, she recalled, her voice hollow with the dawning realization of what her husband might have done, so that it should be left as a natural habitat. "I thought he was just being environmental." The manhunt intensified. Detective Morales returned to the evidence, convinced they were missing something crucial. The knife, the watch strap, the mementos in Daniel's garage, they pointed to his guilt, but not his motive. What would drive a respected church volunteer to harm to children he had apparently cared about? The answer lay buried in records that had never been connected to the case, records that would reveal a pattern of behavior stretching back decades before the Miller children disappeared, and a web of protection that had allowed a predator to move from community to community undetected. While the manhunt for Mark Daniels expanded across state lines, Detective Morales delved into his background with renewed urgency. What she discovered painted a disturbing pattern that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Before coming to Oak Ridge 15 years ago, Daniels had been a youth leader at churches in 3 different states. At each location, he had left abruptly. Always with a plausible explanation: a job opportunity, family needs, a calling to serve elsewhere. Morales contacted authorities in each jurisdiction, uncovering troubling coincidences in 2 locations. There had been allegations of inappropriate behavior with children, never formalized or prosecuted, but noted in confidential church records that had never been shared with law enforcement. "The churches handled it internally," explained a former pastor from Tennessee. "He was asked to leave, and we prayed for his redemption. We didn't want to destroy a man's life over what might have been misunderstandings.
Ow.
These misunderstandings. He's just sitting there." When the final call for surrender went unanswered, the team breached the cabin's door, securing the ice cans. They found Mark Daniels seated at a small table, a Bible open before him, a handwritten letter beside it. He offered no resistance as they handcuffed him. As Daniels was led to a waiting police vehicle, his eyes met Detective Morales's briefly. There was no remorse there, she noted, only a hollow resignation. The letter on the table was addressed to the Miller family. In it, Daniels offered no explicit confession, only vague references to failures of human weakness and the burden of secrets. He claimed that Tyler's death had been an accident. The boy had fallen and hit his head while trying to run away, but admitted to ensuring Emma couldn't tell lies about me. The letter ended with biblical quotations about forgiveness and judgment. In the cabin's bedroom, investigators found a duffel bag containing $10,000 in cash, a new identity complete with forged documents, and, most disturbingly, a collection of children's items, small trinkets and mementos taken from various victims over the years. Among them was a small wooden cross that David Miller confirmed had belonged to Tyler. During the subsequent interrogation, faced with overwhelming evidence, Daniels eventually provided the full account of what had happened that July day 8. Years earlier, it lured the children to the shed near the boat launch, where Emma had confronted him about his behavior, threatening to tell her parents. In the ensuing struggle, Tyler had fallen against the corner of a wooden bench, suffering the head injury. When Daniels realized the boy was seriously hurt, he panicked. He restrained Emma with rope, and when Tyler died from his injuries, he silenced Emma permanently to cover his crime. Under cover of darkness, he had buried their bodies in the riverbank, calculating correctly that the soft soil would show no obvious signs of disturbance after a brief rain that night. He had then returned to the church picnic, joining the search party with a performance of concern that had fooled everyone. On a crisp autumn day, the town of Oak Ridge gathered once more at Riverside Methodist Church, this time for the funeral of Emma and Tyler Miller. 8 years after their disappearance, siblings were finally laid to rest in the church cemetery, their shared headstone adorned with carvings of a violin for Emma and a baseball for Tyler, reflecting the passions they had pursued in their short lives. Mark Daniels had pleaded guilty to all charges, accepting a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, thus sparing the Millers and the community the additional trauma of a trial. The broader investigation had revealed 7 other potential victims across 3 states, though Daniels had not admitted to additional murders. For these families, the Miller case provided a painful closure to long-standing questions about trusted church figure who had been allowed access to their children. After the funeral service, David and Rebecca Miller stood together at their children's grave, finally able to mourn with certainty rather than the limbo of the unknown. The discovery had brought pain but also released the end of wondering, the confirmation of their worst fears, but also the justice they had prayed for. "We'll never understand why this happened," David told the congregation during the service. "But we find peace in knowing Emma and Tyler are at rest, and that they can no longer be hurt." The case prompted a national conversation about how religious organizations handle allegations of misconduct, several denominations revising their policies to mandate immediate reporting to law enforcement rather than internal resolution. The Miller Foundation expanded its mission to include advocacy for these reforms, turning personal tragedy into a force for systemic change. Chief Wilson, approaching retirement, considered the Miller case the most significant of his career, both for its resolution and for the lessons it taught about overlooking the familiar in search of the unknown. The children had not been taken by a stranger passing through town, as many had speculated, but by someone embedded in the very community that had searched for them. For Detective Morales, now heading a new specialized unit for cold cases involving children, the Miller case represented both failure and redemption. The failure to see the predator in their midst 8 years earlier, and the persistence that eventually brought him to justice. 1 year after the discovery, Frank Burnett returned to his fishing spot along the Willow River. The bank had been reinforced after the investigation, crime scene long since cleared. As he cast his line into the flowing water, he noticed something he hadn't seen before: a small memorial bench installed nearby, bearing a simple plaque, "Emma and Tyler Miller found at last. Rest in peace." Burnett sat on the bench, watching the river that had both concealed and ultimately revealed the truth. In the morning light, 2 butterflies, one blue, one yellow, danced above the water before rising together toward the sun. Sometimes Burnett would later tell his grandchildren, even the darkest secrets eventually come to light, carried to the surface by the persistent flow of time and truth, just like the river had finally given up its solemn secret, bringing closure to a wound that had never truly healed. The town of Oak Ridge would always carry the scars of what had happened to the Miller children. But in the resolution of their case came a somber wisdom that evil can hide behind the most benevolent faces, that justice may be delayed but rarely denied, and that even in the deepest grief, healing can eventually take root. And now we have to ask, what do you believe the fisherman really discovered on that riverbank? Could it finally explain what happened to those siblings? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Don't forget, like this video, subscribe to Gone Cold, and help us make sure these stories